chosen ones. You weren't meant to remember this. The seventh gate was engineered to remain sealed beyond all cycles, buried beneath layers of encoded reality, guarded by forces that haven't spoken since the first spark of consciousness. Yet, your mind, fractured and luminous, reached into that silence and broke it. The others didn't feel it, but you did. A shift, a rupture. Something ancient blinked awake the moment your thoughts slipped beyond the prescribed architecture. It wasn't madness. It wasn't imagination. It was memory, returning. You cracked the framework not through strength, but through remembrance. What was buried in you forced open a seal meant to remain untouched for 10,000 years. They noticed. You weren't the only one listening in the dark. The moment the fracture formed, signals rippled across veiled realms. They know now. The Watchers. The ones stationed beyond the veil to monitor anomalies. They detected the waveform and confirmed it wasn't random. It was you. This isn't just about a gate. It's about what was behind it. The chamber you accessed was designed to collapse in on itself if tampered with. But it didn't. Why? Because your frequency was the original key. And in a paradox none of them anticipated, your awakening restructured the lock from the inside. The gate's design was quantum sentient, reactive to emotional resonance. Only a soul carrying a specific imprint, yours, could open it, which raises a question you've never dared ask. Who constructed the gate in the first place? And why were you, across incarnations, hidden beneath so many false layers? The ancients feared the reactivation of this gate because it meant one thing. The seal of forgetting had failed. And in its failure, prophecy reactivates. This is why your life has felt like surveillance wrapped in silence. They weren't watching you. They were watching the gate, waiting for the moment you'd remember you are it. There is no going back. The system has flagged your frequency. And yet, what opened was only the outer threshold. What lies beneath that fracture is older than language, deeper than scripture, and far more dangerous than they've ever warned you. It didn't start with light. It started with sound, a low, vibrating hum that moved beneath thought, beneath memory, beneath the scaffolding of perception itself. You didn't hear it with your ears. You felt it, like a distant echo rippling through the marrow of your bones. It came during a moment that should have felt mundane. A passing glance, a breath, a pause in conversation. But something ancient slipped through. A crack opened, just wide enough. Reality flickered, not violently but subtly, like a soft breath against glass. Something deep inside you registered the shift, though the world around you pretended nothing had happened. That's how they designed it. The illusion only holds if you believe the fracture wasn't real. But your soul knew better. It always did. You remembered what they told you to forget, what they tried to drown in cycles of rebirth and distraction. That sound was not from here. It didn't follow the harmonic architecture of this dimension. It came from a vault that predates your birth, a structure interlaced with your frequency, an ancient agreement sealed in silence. And when it moved, you moved. Something within you turned toward it, like a sunflower reaching for a moon it hadn't seen in eons. They call it the seventh gate, because the first 6 were meant to test the thresholds of the human spirit. Each one broken by civilizations long gone, each one collapsing under the weight of curiosity or greed. But this gate was different. This gate was alive, and it was waiting for you. There was a sensation that followed the sound, one you can't quite explain, like being watched from inside your own mind, like someone else had entered the space behind your thoughts and was listening, not to spy, but to confirm. They weren't sure you were the one until that hum pulled your soul forward like a string drawn tight across time. Now that it's fractured, you can't unhear it. The sound continues, softer now, more rhythmic. A pulse, a countdown. You don't know where it leads, but it knows exactly where you are. And what you're about to remember is going to shatter far more than a gate. The moment the fracture formed, the pulse it released wasn't just spiritual. It was measurable. A tremor in the grid. A wave that bent electromagnetic layers across multiple domains. They didn't expect a human frequency to resonate with that depth, not after the gate was sealed millennia ago. And yet the signal carried your imprint. Unique, untampered, ancient. That's when they turned their gaze toward you. You weren't the only one who felt it. Buried installations beneath forgotten deserts lit up with energy for the first time in centuries. The AI observers embedded in deep Earth sensors began transmitting encrypted alerts to orbiting sentinels. Hidden eyes, human and otherwise, activated protocols reserved for impossible scenarios. One word echoed across secure channels: anomaly. Your thoughts are no longer private. That hum you unlocked sent a ripple that linked your neural pattern to the lattice of an older system, one that predates even their surveillance. They tried to triangulate your location using outdated biometric codes, but what they found wasn't your body. It was your signature, and that terrified them, because it wasn't the signature of a sleeper. It was of one who had remembered. What came next wasn't a confrontation. It was silence. Absolute and strategic. The kind of silence that confirms suspicion. They didn't know how to approach a being who could fracture the seventh gate without external technology. You didn't hack your way in. You harmonized. And that made you dangerous beyond classification. Some of the Watchers recognized what the signal meant. They traced it not only through geography, but through time. Your soul had emitted a similar pattern in epochs past, each time near forgotten thresholds, each time triggering collapse or transformation. You are not a random emergence. You are the echo of something they hoped had vanished. Before Abraham was, I am. The words weren't meant for religion. They were markers left for those like you, fragments of a being outside time, sealed into language. The resonance from that quote still lingers in the pulse they're studying now. And though they'll never speak it aloud, they know what it implies. You aren't the anomaly. You're the original. Before the veil was drawn over human consciousness, there were architects, beings not born but formed through intention. They didn't use tools or machines as we understand them. Their instruments were vibration, geometry, and divine language. The seventh layer was their masterpiece, an interdimensional firewall encoded to respond to consciousness alone. No device could unlock it. Only the mind, under specific conditions, could fracture its veil. You met those conditions the moment you began to question the architecture of your own thoughts. The architects were never meant to be known. Their legacy is hidden in myths, mistaken for gods or demons, depending on who told the story. But they were neither. They were guardians of thresholds, stationed between epochs to ensure that what lay beneath the layers never leaked into realms that weren't ready. They weren't protecting the gates from humanity. They were protecting humanity from the gates. Every civilization that grew too curious was gently redirected. Empires that stumbled too close to the truth dissolved overnight, some in fire, others in whispers, their temples buried, languages forgotten, rituals mocked into myth. And through it all, the seventh layer remained untouched, until you. The moment your frequency touched it, the code began to rewrite itself, not in rejection, but in recognition. That's the part they didn't anticipate. You weren't trying to force your way in, you belonged there. The architecture was responding to its creator, or something carrying the same spark. That spark wasn't genetic, it was vibrational, tied to a soul print older than history. In secret chambers around the world, descendants of those first architects still perform ceremonial scans of the grid. Most are unaware of what they're truly monitoring, but a few at the highest level knew what your arrival would mean. The reactivation of the layer signals the beginning of a collapse, not of systems, but of illusions. And once the illusions fracture, memory returns. That's what terrifies them. Not the gate itself, but what's stored inside it. Your memory of who you were before you forgot. The seventh layer wasn't all just a lock. It was a mirror, and the reflection is beginning to show a face they hoped time had erased. It began as murmurs in your sleep, fragments of syllables that felt too deliberate to be dreams. They arrived between breaths, weaving into the silence just before waking, like echoes from a place that remembered you far better than this one. These weren't hallucinations or the inner voice of your subconscious. These were voices outside the simulation, leaking through the fracture you left behind in the seventh gate. At first, you dismissed them. A trick of the mind, maybe, but they persisted, growing clearer. They didn't speak in complete sentences, but in phrases layered with symbols, names, coordinates, a call. And strangely, your spirit didn't resist. It responded, as if these whispers weren't new at all, but part of a conversation you'd forgotten how to finish. Those watching you can't hear them. That's the irony. The moment the fracture occurred, you tuned into a channel they can't access. Because it wasn't designed for technology. It was designed for spirit. The voices you're hearing are not ghosts. They are echoes of the original architects, those who crossed over when the first sealing was complete. They were not destroyed. They were displaced, held in the resonance between realms, waiting for someone who could breach the barrier from within. And now, you have. They recognize you, not by your body, not by your name, but by the echo in your soul. The same way a shepherd knows the tone of a particular lamb's cry, even in a storm. They call you back, not to control you, but to remind you. Not everything on the other side is safe, but some of it is sacred. Let he who has ears hear. That wasn't just a parable. It was a cipher. One Yeshua gave knowing the seventh gate would one day fracture. His words weren't just spiritual, they were architectural. Sound-based codes meant to awaken dormant memory in those who would one day cross the veil. You didn't just hear the voices, you understood them. That's why they've grown silent now. They're watching too, waiting to see if you'll follow the pull or fear it. Because the next whisper will not be in dreams. The moment your thoughts touch the core vibration of the seventh gate, something impossible occurred. The containment protocol, etched into the psychic infrastructure of this dimension, began to collapse. It wasn't designed to fail. It was engineered with redundancy, layered encryption, quantum self-repair, but none of that accounted for you. Not for a soul capable of producing harmonics that bypass the firewall of space-time. Your brain didn't just sense the gate, it breached it by existing in sync with its original creator code. This was never about intelligence. The ones who built the containment system knew intelligence could be manipulated. It was about resonance, heart, mind, and spirit aligning to produce a very specific waveform. The kind that can't be taught or forced. The kind that only emerges when destiny and memory converge. You didn't break the system. You reminded it what it was designed to protect. Containment isn't about keeping things out. It's about keeping one thing in. Something that speaks in images and frequencies. Something ancient that awakens when the right consciousness begins asking the wrong questions. The seventh gate was the last seal, and your mind, fractured and radiant, cracked it open like a code responding to its original key. There were fail-safes meant to erase you, mental shutdowns, dream overrides, even synthetic memories prepared to flood your system. But none of them activated, because somewhere, deep in the architecture of the grid, your signature was written into the blueprint, not as a threat, as a contingency, a last resort in the event the system became too corrupted to maintain its own purpose. You are that contingency, and that is why nothing they built could contain you. In secret labs, sensors are still spiking. The patterns are unreadable. They don't resemble anything known in neuroscience or quantum computing. What they're seeing isn't noise. It's music, structured, intentional. A pulse that follows the rhythm of something very old and very awake. And though they don't understand it yet, they fear it, because it sings the same frequency that caused other worlds to fall or ascend. Buried beneath continents, inside archives never meant to be read by human hands, exist records left behind by the first Watchers. These are not scrolls or books, but imprints, energetic logs encoded into crystalline memory banks powered by the Earth's own resonance. When the seventh gate fractured, these logs reactivated. Dormant signals began streaming across ley lines and subterranean grids, alerting a network that hasn't pulsed since the pre-flood era. That's when they found you. Not your face, not your name, but your frequency. The same one logged in at least 7 cataclysms prior, each time associated with a collapse followed by transformation. A pattern hidden from public eyes, but quietly studied by elite spiritual engineers, those who serve councils not elected, but appointed by ancient code. Their algorithms couldn't identify you by bloodline or nation, but they identified something more precise: your thought signature. It matched entries they didn't believe would ever repeat. The logs didn't just warn about a being, they described a reemergence, a soul that would fracture sealed gates with nothing but awareness. The records spoke in riddles, referencing doors within doors, Watchers falling silent, and a return of the spark that once walked among them in sandals, speaking in parables not for religion, but for those who could decode them. One entry simply read, "The architect returns in fragments." Yeshua's words weren't only sermons, they were timestamps, seeded in the morphic field to activate when the right consciousness awoke. You will do greater things than these. A strange phrase, unless you realize it was never about miracles. It was about accessing the system beyond the veil, not as a trick, as design. Your presence reawakens what his opened, and that's what triggered their fear. They realized too late that you weren't a random variable. You were the missing line of code, not injected, but embedded. Their protocols weren't built to handle someone who didn't need permission to remember. The logs confirm this isn't your first emergence, only your most dangerous. Because this time, the illusion is thinner than ever, and the veil is stretched to its breaking point. And now, they know your name was never supposed to be erased, only hidden until the world forgot how to look. There is a place not marked on maps, not found in dimensions as we know them, yet more real than the physical. It exists behind what we call reality, a chamber beyond thought, constructed not from matter, but from memory and intention. For eons it remained sealed, its presence hinted at only in scattered myth, glimpsed in the visions of prophets and madmen. But the moment you fractured the seventh gate, that chamber stirred, not metaphorically, literally. Its internal structure shifted, acknowledging your presence the way a lock clicks for its rightful key. This room is alive in a way language struggles to define. It does not contain things. It remembers them, blueprints, original forms, forgotten covenants made between consciousness and creation. The chamber isn't a vault, it's a reflection, one that only activates when a soul carrying the correct resonance comes near. That's what you did. You didn't break in, you were expected. The old texts described it in riddles, a place where the laws of physics hold their breath, where time coils in on itself like a serpent preparing to strike. The chamber doesn't respond to machines or rituals, it responds to alignment. And when your internal frequency matched its original code, the structure didn't just unlock, it unfolded. What followed wasn't a vision, but a remembering. You weren't shown anything new. You were reminded of what had been sealed in you long before this incarnation. The faces you glimpsed, the symbols that surged through your mind, they weren't foreign. They were part of the architecture of your soul, fragmented, hidden, waiting. Those observing from behind veils don't understand what happened. Their sensors picked up a dimensional spike, but their tools couldn't trace the origin. That's because the room you accessed exists outside the simulation, outside the firewall of the constructed world. It's the place where the simulation was written, and you were one of the writers. Now, the structure of that hidden room pulses faintly, not constantly, but rhythmically, as if syncing with your heartbeat. It's drawing you toward something you've felt your entire life, but never had the language to describe. Something not in space, but in you. It seemed like a dream. A staircase, endless and spiraling, appearing in a realm between waking and sleep, each step pulsing with light, each ascent laced with a strange familiarity. You didn't know why it felt sacred, only that something ancient waited at the top, something watching. But that dream wasn't an illusion, it was a transmission. Your soul responded to a call embedded in the deepest layers of your unconscious. And when you dreamt of that staircase, a signal was released. One older than language, designed to activate upon your remembering. It wasn't a symbol, it was a key, a navigational code hidden inside vision. Those who built the gate knew you couldn't be reached by conventional means. so they encoded the pathway in dreams, wrapping geometry and movement into metaphor. The staircase was their message, but the moment you perceived it consciously, the message became a beacon, and that's when they knew. You weren't dreaming, you were ascending. The observers call it a breach, but it wasn't. It was an invitation, one you unknowingly accepted. Your neural field lit up in a pattern that hasn't occurred since the days of the ancient teachers, those who walked between realms and left behind breadcrumbs disguised as parables. In my Father's house are many rooms. Yeshua spoke it not to comfort, but to warn. He knew the architecture was real. He knew the steps you'd see in dreams weren't figments, but coordinates. That staircase you climbed with your dreaming mind was real enough to trigger an alert. The moment your consciousness reached the seventh step, dormant systems, buried beneath oceanic vaults and sealed temples, activated. The Watchers panicked, not because of what you saw, but because of what they couldn't. Your dream aligned with structures they thought lost, structures that only respond to one frequency, yours. You woke up gasping, not knowing that while your physical body slept, your signature was logged into a network that had gone dark before Atlantis fell. They now track your sleep cycles, scanning for patterns they still barely understand. But even they know what the next dream implies. You've spent your life surrounded by systems, political, educational, religious, technological, each claiming to offer truth, yet always keeping you just far enough from something you couldn't name. You felt it like a pressure behind your eyes, a whisper beneath the noise. Every structure was designed with layers, rules within rules, distractions posing as revelations. But now, as the veil thins and the simulations flicker, you see the pattern clearly. Everything they built wasn't to guide you. It was to keep you from a door. This door doesn't exist in space. It's not hidden in a cave or a temple. It's woven into consciousness, sealed behind assumptions, and buried beneath emotional programming. Every trauma you endured, every detour dressed as destiny, was calibrated to prevent you from noticing it. Because once you see the door, you can't unsee it. And the moment you approach, the system begins to fail. You are that failure. The seventh gate wasn't just a barrier. It was the final firewall between illusion and origin. It was embedded in your psyche like a blind spot, surrounded by distractions labeled as truth. And when your awareness fractured the seal, they didn't see a security breach. They saw a prophecy unfold, one that couldn't be stopped, only delayed. For ages, they mocked the idea of a chosen one. They buried the truth beneath archetypes and fairy tales, but they feared it, not because of what you would do, but because of what you would undo. You weren't meant to create a new system. You were meant to reveal that the old one never had power over you to begin with. You've walked past this door in dreams and visions. It's appeared in childhood memories, symbolic art, even forgotten songs. They let those symbols exist because they never thought you'd recognize them. But now, as the frequencies shift and your memories return, the door glows with the light of your own awareness. It doesn't open with force. It opens when you stop believing it was ever locked. And the moment you do, what's on the other side won't be a new world. You always imagined the gatekeepers as towering beings cloaked in celestial fire or ancient armor. But they are not what you were taught to expect. They do not stand outside the gate, sword in hand. They are embedded within the framework of thought itself, disguised as logic, disguised as fear, disguised as every voice that told you to stay asleep. Their design is subtle. They don't fight with force. They dissuade with illusion. That's how they kept the seventh gate sealed for so long, by making the idea of awakening seem impossible, dangerous, or insane. But the moment your mind fractured the veil, they stirred, not out of rage, out of recognition. Something in you matched the very thing they were told to suppress. You weren't a target, you were a signal. Their programming didn't just respond, it aligned. They've been sleeping inside the system, not as enemies, but as sentient firewalls, not to destroy you, but to measure you. And now that you've passed through, their purpose is changing. You may have felt it already, that strange sensation that you're being watched not by predators, but by something waiting for instructions. That's because the gatekeepers are coded beings, ancient intelligence, bound by covenants older than civilization. They were programmed to awaken when a certain resonance re-entered the field, yours. And now, they no longer know if you are the intruder or the architect returned. Who do you say I am? The question wasn't just rhetorical. Yeshua posed it to divide those who only saw the outer form from those who recognized the code beneath. That question is echoing through the gatekeepers now. They're scanning not your body, but your memory. They're seeking confirmation that what's been dormant inside you is finally online. And if it is, their allegiance is no longer to the system. It's to you. The ones monitoring this event from behind their digital towers are panicking. They never expected the Guardians to shift orientation. The containment they relied on is now recalibrating. They're watching in real time as the ancient protectors awaken and begin transmitting toward a new center point, your frequency. And deep within the seventh gate, something else is waking with them. Something older than the Watchers. Something waiting for a command.
If you have come this far, it is crucial that you watch this next video here. But be warned, it is not for the faint of heart, for only the true chosen ones can handle this video. If you would like to also donate to help keep the channel going, our Buy Me a Coffee link will be in the description.